Thank you all for being here. My belief is that a well-informed public is the basis of sound national security strategy. I'm not sure how well-informed you are after last night, and certainly by looking at this, I don't think you're as well-informed as you need to be as a public. And I hope, and perhaps some of you, that the hearings that are going to go on in Congress are going to look more closely at these various assertions that are being made. Let me take a second to thank my fellow panelists here and associate myself with virtually everything they have said, especially Professor Barouse's comment that we've gotten a little better at chasing down the Al-Qaeda network. I think I'm here tonight because an academic is allowed only one big idea in his career. Mine was networks. And I said about 15 years ago that we had to start getting good at understanding these networks, particularly this little group that we helped get started 20 years ago called Al-Qaeda, because they seemed to get this concept really well and use it skillfully, and they were going to get really problematic. I wish I had been more persuasive earlier. This didn't have to happen. As I wrote in one of my books, the 1990s was a period like the 1930s. In the 1930s, the world looked on as the fascists grew in power. In the 1990s, we looked on as the terror networks grew in power. It's a terrible, terrible thing. The other reason I'm here is maybe I can answer a few questions you have about specifically military issues having to do with the next phase in Afghanistan. My public affairs officer says I can't talk about anything operational. I said, define that. And he said, oh, you know. So I'll go over the line, but I won't say so much that you have to be detained. In this first set of comments, I just want to say a few things about this plan that was announced last night, which I think might make good politics, but certainly makes bad strategy. And what do I mean by that? First, there's the idea that war is a numbers game, that you're going to do better if you throw more troops and more resources at the problem. And this is a group that remembers the Vietnam era pretty clearly. It's now 37 years since I started being involved with the military, in and out of uniform ever since. My recollection as a young man was we kept adding and adding and adding numbers and lost anyway. And we trained 1 million Vietnamese to fight on their own, and we lost anyway. War is not a numbers game. It's the business of skillful strategy. And that's what's missing. In the President's comments, he gave a long list of things we want to do: take away Haven, have good governance, go after Al-Qaeda, etc. Where's the how are you going to do it? The only how part is we're going to send a lot more troops to do this. Well, what are the details of that? The sad news is a lot of the rural areas where our troops are most needed, the ones I work with most closely, our Special Operations Forces, live in and around these remote villages. And when our guys are there, you know what happens? They give confidence to the locals, who bring in information about where the bad guys are. Now we're going to be abandoning those and hunkering down in a few large cities. Wrong-headed. I'm most associated with, as some of you know, I guess the last time I was here, I talked about this, why we needed very much not just to add troops into Iraq, but to have little outposts in villages all over the country, little platoon size, 40 American soldiers with 40 friendly Iraqi soldiers. And we had to do what? We had to negotiate with the very people we were fighting with. And some of you remember, Shamsia says sometimes people think she's not American because she was first generation Afghan. They think I'm not American because I have these odd ideas. So that's kind of the same boat. I said we have to talk to our enemies, and as many of you in this room remember, I took a great deal of heat for that, both in and out of government, and from gentlemen like Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly, and still have a lot of permanent scar tissue. But you know what? When we did that, when we got into the towns, the villages in Anbar province, and when we started talking to the very people who were fighting us, all 23 tribes turned around and came to the cause. What's the win in Iraq? The win is 3 years ago, 100 innocent Iraqis were being killed every single day. In November of 2009, less than 100 Iraqis died in all the violence for the whole month. To me, a win is if you can save those kind of lives. And I think Maziar said it extremely well. You're not going to eradicate these opponents, but you can contain them. We all spent a long time in the Cold War saying, well, we can't get rid of the Soviet Union, and even now that that's gone, we still have the Russians, right? But you can contain the threat. Well, that's the same thing with these networks. They are containable, and the goal should be to allow these countries to be able to contain. I think they're probably going to require a little bit of our presence for a very long time. The big military mistake the president's made is he's going to lay down a lot of troops right away, which means that people are going to demand immediate results. That's why he says they're coming out so quickly. The president had said last night, I'm pulling out 2/3 of the troops that we have in the country right now, and instead we're just going to have these little special forces teams and some of our paratroopers and small teams all over the country, and we're going to reach out. And the president did say this. There's this tantalizing sentence in his speech where he says, you know what, we'll reach out to the reconcilable Taliban. That's the one ray of hope, folks, that we might be moving in the right direction. And I can't say a lot about the policy discourse that I've been involved with, but I have been a little involved with it. The greatest champion of this view was Vice President Biden, who did not carry the day. But these views were heard, and the answer is right here on page 1 of this press release. Review process. The review was deliberate and disciplined. Well, that's what you get with a general as National Security Advisor. Deliberate and disciplined. You don't get creative, you don't get out of the box, you get, we're going to send a whole bunch more troops, and we're going to pound the hell out of these guys. This is extremely unimaginative, and the Commander-in-Chief, I think, should have gone another direction. The point about governance troubled me very much, and I'll get to our general discussion in a moment here, but I have to say a word about governance and a word about Pakistan. I was ashamed as an American to listen to the president choking on those words about President Karzai being installed in a legitimate process. This was a fraudulent election. He used a lot of high-flown rhetoric about what we stand for, and then turned it on its head and said, well, this guy cheated, but we're with him anyway. And I think as long as that's out there, that we are aligning ourselves with fraud, there's no skillful way ahead. Last on Pakistan, I don't think Afghanistan has a Pakistan problem. I think Pakistan has an Afghanistan problem. And that is, the more we try to solve the problem of Afghanistan by changing Pakistan, the greater the risk of social revolution in that country, a Muslim nation armed with nuclear weapons. There's very little that we can do, and Ziara is right, the Pakistani military has a very hard time trying to bring order to the tribal areas. And the more that is done, the more damage that is done, the more innocent people that are killed in our predator bombing campaigns, the closer Pakistan teeters to the brink of revolution. The example of Iraq is that we made the situation a lot better there without ever going into Iran, without going into Syria, and getting no help from either of those countries. We figured out how to win the fight in Iraq. And that's what we have to do inside Afghanistan, and we can. This enemy is not 10 feet tall. They move around slowly in small groups. There's no chance they're going to mount a major invasion, such as happened to Saigon in 1975. That's not the threat. The threat is they're going to blow things up occasionally. And I think the goal, the winning goal, is let's keep that violence down to as low a level as we possibly can. And there are skillful ways to do this with a small number of troops. And here's where I think good politics and good strategy could have come together. Smaller number of troops, used in different ways to illuminate the enemy network, work with friendly Afghans, negotiate with the very insurgents we're fighting to turn as many of them as possible. That's the kind of strategic judo that we need. Unfortunately, our National Security Advisor and those around the President are all heavy punching boxers. Well, we're going to have a little general discussion now, but thanks for your indulgence.